I think where people have been cautious is letting an AI loose with their data. One of the things I think is most useful is giving people back the time needed to do analysis.
What's the cost of not knowing your numbers in business in real time?
Data can certainly inform what your goals should be, but having the goals on the front end can really help.
Hey, welcome back. We're here for another episode of Thrive Local. Today, I'm joined by Lauren Lacy, who's the founder of One Analytics, which is a company she started in January of 2022 with a clear mission. That is to help organizations harness the power of data to drive return on investment. With a strong background in both finance and marketing, Lauren understands the unique challenges businesses face and excels at using data to bring departments together to solve problems and seize new opportunities. Lauren has worked with several leading business intelligence platforms, including Domo, Looker Studio, and Tableau, and her experience spans a wide range of industries from financial services and retail to e-commerce, education, and nonprofits. When she's not diving into data, Lauren enjoys running, reading novels, and exploring Richmond with her family. I'm excited to have Lauren, another tech nerd in the space of data and websites, and really using data to help run our businesses and make more informed decisions. So that all being said, without further ado, Lauren, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here and excited to hear more about what you're doing with the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, a lot of about the podcast, I'll just put a short little plug here. Thrive Local, it's really been bringing on and kind of just having more conversations around business and kind of how business owners are thriving in this modern world that we live in. So, I mean, I've had, I mentioned before, like we hit recorded, you're my seventh interview since I started doing interviews last Monday. So it's been a week. I had my last interview was with a dentist here in the local area. Most of the people are here local in Richmond, but I do have some connections outside of the Richmond area who are professionals that I believe, people in my network, because I kind of started online. So these are people who I believe have a valuable message. So, I'm giving them this platform to be able to kind of share their message. So, it's exciting. That podcasting really gives me a lot of energy, and I'm just excited to be connecting and having these conversations. So.
Yeah, it's great. So much of business ownership can feel like you're in your own little silo and bubble. It's nice to get a chance to hear what other people are working on and what people are thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. It helps shape your perspective in the world. And it can, we live in this remote world too for me personally, and I know you as well, we've had some conversations about this, and it can get lonely. And there are times where you kind of seek connection. And so it can be a forcing function for that, just like building those connections and conversations. Well, I want to talk about, just kind of starting things off here. I want to talk a little bit more about your background and kind of what got you into data analytics, and just kind of share that with the audience on how you got started.
Yeah, absolutely. So prior to starting One Analytics, I ran an analytics team at a marketing agency, and I feel incredibly fortunate for the experience that I had there. It's like I often tell people it's kind of as close to an apprenticeship for what I do now as you can get. So I was spending time working on the various data projects clients had, but I was also thinking about, like, how do you price those kind of services, and what are clients really looking for from a data analytics professional, and how's the best way to deliver work to a client. So very fortunate that I was able to kind of work on the full aspect of delivering a project to clients prior to going out and starting my own thing. And then leading into starting One Analytics, I just felt like it was kind of the right time personally and professionally to take a leap into entrepreneurship if I ever was going to. And so One Analytics was kind of born out of the experience that I had of seeing clients really find value in the data that they had, but data kind of often being this heavy burden that organizations kind of try to manage and spend a lot of time trying to manage, but not something that organizations necessarily see tremendous value out of because of a variety of issues that kind of come along with data.
So what makes and I know data sometimes can feel very heavy on a person when it comes to, like, all right, I have all these numbers and ratios and everything to look at, and it's like, sometimes, especially if you're not getting a report that's digestible and easy to understand or interpret into something that can inform behavior.
Mhm.
Um, what have you found to be really useful for people when it comes to being able to interpret the data and able to make informed decisions for their business?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, one of the things I think is most useful is giving people back the time needed to do analysis.
Yeah.
So, when I think about kind of the status quo at a lot of businesses, it's heavily manual reporting. So, what that means is an employee of the business is typically going in on some scheduled cadence, weekly or monthly or annually, and they go into all the different systems the business uses and they pull or download data from those systems. And then they very painstakingly get it into a report, probably in Excel, and they format it. And there's kind of two problems with that. One is that they spend a lot more time getting the data into the report than they do actually thinking about what the data means and how do we interpret it and what decisions do we make off of it. But also, the report is often kind of stale by the time it arrives on the desks of stakeholders. Like it's not updated data. It's for last month. It's for last year. So, we often recommend kind of automating reports as a first step in kind of getting to the point of analysis because automating a report, A, gives you updated data. And as a business owner or leader, you want to be kind of operating off of the most current picture you can out of what's happening with your business. But you also, want to free employees up to do that kind of analysis and interpretation that you're talking about. So I mean, it's way more valuable rather than having an employee spend an hour generating a sales report. It's way more valuable to say to that employee, spend an hour figuring out why sales of this product went up 50% month over month. Like, did
Yeah.
we run a different ad campaign? Is this a normal seasonal fluctuation that we would expect to see every year? Answers to those kind of questions and doing those kind of analyses can be so valuable. But you almost can't get to it unless you free your team up to in terms of just a sheer hours perspective to kind of do those deeper, more meaningful projects.
Yeah, that's a great point as far as the aging of the data, because there does come a point where it's like, you know what, this is a little bit whatever damage could have been done has already been done, or
Yeah.
the ability to make any kind of decision. It's like that. There's a time window there, and it's already passed. And
Yeah.
so it's like, what's the cost of not knowing your numbers in business in real time? And
Yeah. It
yeah,
can be tremendous for people because I mean, the speed with which we're doing business. I mean, you talked a little bit about when you were describing the podcast, your network being,
yeah.
digital and virtual. Like the speed with which we make decisions in business has just changed tremendously over the years. And kind of having a portrait of data that shows you what's happening right now is really critical to be able to make decisions that keep up with the pace that we need to make decisions.
I want to ask you about systems that, because I've come across this, not, I mean, in just various contexts in my own business and client businesses where, um, you have a system like, just say like a CRM, right? And
Mhm.
you have a CRM, but it's not quite, it's not really the best fit CRM for the business, because I've learned that like not every CRM is, it's not like one size fits all. Some CRMs are better for some business models, but not for others. And I understand like there's this first step of like, let's get some automations going on in terms of being able to collect data. Do you ever come across times where you go, you know what, before we even do that, you might want to fix your system first? Like there's some broken pieces here in the system you have before we start automating this stuff. Or is it something that you're like, how do you handle those situations, I guess is my question. Like, do you just go ahead and automate it and have the data start compiling and then you go work through a solution? Or is that even something you even work with the client with in general?
So it's a great question. When we start doing a project at One Analytics, one of the first kind of pieces to a project for us is really looking at the systems that we're going to try to pull data from. And, often with an outdated system, sometimes we hear from the client, like we log into the system and we don't see any of the data that we're looking for.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's just no like pre-built reporting in some of these older, more outdated systems, or just systems that maybe aren't outdated, but just have less functionality. And we do that assessment partially because sometimes, even if there's a not the data the client wants in a report within the system, there's sometimes ways to get the data we want out of the system. So for example, sometimes systems will have a method of exporting to Excel or into via an API
Yep.
that lets us get the desired data out of the system in a way that the client couldn't when they were just looking within the system itself. So, we really start to do a discovery process from a data perspective of understanding like, can we really not get what we need, or do we just need to get what we need in an alternative manner?
Mm.
If the system like really doesn't collect the data that the client is looking to understand, we kind of go down a process of discovery with the client and start asking questions like, okay, if the data isn't in the system, is it in another system already that the client is using? And could we just kind of stitch the data together to get the picture the client is looking
Mm.
for? We also try to understand how the client really uses each system. So, like, if you get rid of this, what business processes get disrupted for you? So, taking a holistic view of the business and not being
Right.
so myopically focused on the data side that we neglect the fact that other people are using and
Mm. Yeah.
interacting with the system. So, it's really we do work on these sorts of questions like the ones you're having. It's really a process of discovery and kind of working side by side with the client to like bring our technical expertise to bear on in terms of what can we do with the system, but also really understanding the client's needs and requirements.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Understand the when it comes to like you're there to kind of find the data, compile it, and so you can analyze it and provide some kind of a report that they can use to make decisions with. And but also being respectful to the fact that it's like there is a system in place. This is their system. It may not, because I'm thinking of one right now off the top of my head is CRM, but it doesn't really produce sales reports, which is kind of weird that a CRM doesn't
Yeah.
produce a sales report, but it doesn't. And you have to extract it out to a we use Google Sheets, like a Google Sheet or something, and be able
Mm-hmm.
to, just to be able to have something to look at. And so, but there's reasons why, like reasons you may not even see that they need that system in place for. So being able to respect that and understanding holistically I like that thought process that you have. It makes a lot of sense. What about like when it comes to like you've compiled the data and you're analyzing it, are there any things is there anything, I guess, like that a business owner can do in terms of like thinking through like the KPIs? Like when it comes to like, okay, now that we understand the data or we're compiling this data, do you work with the business owner and kind of determining what are the KPIs based on the data, or are they bringing that to you as far as these are the indicators that we want to really measure and monitor and track? How do you kind of get to that conclusion for figuring out what exactly it is that you want to measure and track for data?
Yeah. So it's interesting kind of you can think about it the way you're thinking about it as like what is the data we have and how does that inform our goals or KPIs moving forward. But in our role, we often think about kind of KPIs even before data is collected.
Mm.
So, I work with businesses to really understand what their end goal is for a given marketing campaign or when they're redesigning their website, what's the goal behind this? And you mentioned in the intro, I do have a finance background. So, kind of bottom line goals are very important in
Yeah.
my view often. So, like, how does this tie into revenue? How does this actually impact the business as it runs? So, understanding those KPIs at the beginning of a process is super helpful for two reasons. One, as part of our business, we set up tracking for companies. So we'll go in and we'll set up tools like Google Analytics
Mm-hmm.
that will show what occurs on the site, how many times it occurs, et cetera. And we'll set up tracking for KPIs. So if it's an e-commerce site we're working with, like we will set up the tracking to ensure that when a purchase occurs, we track that and we know what ad campaign that purchase came from.
Yep.
So that's like a really important component of it. And then second, understanding the KPIs early on can allow us to, as the data does come in, we can be responding to what the data is showing us in accordance with the KPI. So if we know that the goal is purchases and we're seeing in the data that there's just a tremendous number of abandoned carts,
Mm,
so people put something in their cart, but then they leave, like
yeah.
we can get very focused on why are those abandoned carts happening? Are certain types of people more likely to abandon a cart than others? Is
Mm.
there a method for pulling these people back in? So understanding data can certainly inform what your goals should be, but having the goals on the front end can really help a data analytics partner set up the right tracking and ask the right questions when they do an analysis.
Yeah, start with the kind of like the whole starting with the end in mind. Like this is where we're trying
Yeah.
to go, and then we need to figure out what needs to be tracked that measures that performance that gets us there. Yeah, perfect. I want to get into some of the platforms that you're using. Some of them I'm familiar with. Like I'm familiar with Looker Studio, and
Mhm.
but I think it's Domo, right? Is that how you
Uh-huh.
pronounce it? Uh,
Yeah.
tell me about Domo. Like, tell me about some of these platforms. Like, what are they capable of producing for folks these days as far as analytics? What's the bells and whistles that comes along with them, and how can it help? How can it help business owners?
Sure. So Domo and Looker Studio and Tableau and Power BI kind of all fall under an umbrella of BI platforms or business intelligence platforms.
Yeah.
So those are really tools that allow you to more efficiently clean and combine and visualize the data that you're working with. So often, especially smaller businesses, are very familiar with doing this work in Excel. So they know the pivot tables and they like the conditional formatting and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And that's great and valuable. As a finance person, I often kind of joke that Excel was my first love in this area, but
Yeah.
it also at some point you outgrow it because there's just limits to how much data it can handle and the types of things you can do with the data. So the BI platforms really get you to that next level.
Mm,
And they're really helpful in helping automate the work you're doing. So tools like Domo allow you to set up a connector that will run on a set cadence, pulling your data in every day or every week, and then it'll run through the same transformation every time and get into the graphs and charts that you've set up in a dashboard. So it takes out that manual step of someone kind of the manual reporting we talked about earlier,
right.
someone logging into Facebook, pulling down the data they want, manipulating the data as it needs to be, and then putting it into a graph in Excel. So those tools can really help businesses up level their data analytics efforts.
So is it something where because one thing I took from that is that it's a more scalable solution. So
Mm-hmm.
as your business grows, it's like, hey, this can keep up with the growth. Whereas a Google Sheet or an Excel document, it's so funny. I always keep saying Google Sheets because I don't know. It's probably like been 10 years now. I just like stopped using Excel and just went. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's all I use now is Google. So anyway, same thing. The kind of the spreadsheet format where
Yep.
that ends up becoming, it gets to a point where that you kind of outgrow it, as you said. Is there a point in time where it's like where it still makes sense to kind of use the Google Sheet or Excel document and then you upgrade into something like a Domo, or is it better just to go, you know what, out of the gate, let's get you set up on Domo because it's going to be scalable for you and it's going to be a better resource overall?
Yeah. So it's a good question. I mean, I think I would recommend for businesses starting out definitely exploring a BI platform in one form or another. So, Domo has a price tag associated with it. Looker Studio does not.
Right.
So if you're looking for a tool to kind of help you automate the visualization of data, but you're not at the point yet where you're ready to sink a budget into that tool, Booker Studio is a really great on-ramp, and especially for companies that are mostly on Google products. So like if you're using Google Analytics, if you're running Google Ads, there are pre-built Google connectors that will pull that data into
Hmm.
Booker Studio and let you set up really great dashboards. So if you're a business early on and you're spending money on Google Ads, or you really want to know what's going on with your website, look using Looker Studio to kind of start out that BI process and start getting away from purely manual reports in Excel can be a really great introductory step that doesn't cost you anything and saves you a lot of time.
Is it how what's like the learning curve for Looker Studio? I mean, is it something that I guess a novice would be able to kind of set up fairly easily, or would you still need somebody more technically, I guess, sound to understand how to get it set up for you?
So it's really a matter of preference and how much time you want to spend learning it. So there's a lot of great resources online that will walk
Yeah.
you through how to do stuff with Booker Studio. It's definitely something that as a business owner, you could go in and work through setting up something in Looker Studio. That being said, I recognize as a business owner myself that not everybody is going to want to learn it. They don't have the inclination
Yeah.
or the desire to learn that. And in that case, it can be helpful to just bring in an external partner that's going to perhaps get you set up more quickly and ensure that all the data in your report is fully accurate without you having to kind of have the hassle associated with doing it yourself.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question actually is like, okay, that person looks at this and goes, you know what? Because even things, and I've noticed doing website design that there are clients that I look at a process or something to set up online. I'm like, this is very simple. And like I'll even say it to the client, this is a really simple thing, but they just don't want to touch it. They don't
Yeah.
want to be in the tech. It doesn't matter how simple it may be. They don't want to touch it. And they would rather have somebody they want to do their thing and they want to leave the technical stuff to other people like yourself, right? It's like you set this up for me. So that was going to be kind of my next question is like when you're working with clients, is that like your flexibility, like tell me a little bit about your flexibility when it comes to working with clients. Are you open to taking like, hey, I just need to get Looker Studio set up to do a couple of analytics all the way up to some full scale set up for a business and sales and analytics, or is what's the scale of I guess project and scope that makes sense when it comes to working with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it really does run the gambit of like what you're describing of everything from a very simple, like just need Looker Studio set up
Yeah.
to a much more involved, like we want to really build out a full, data process for a full-fledged BI platform. So it really runs the gambit. I also will say I'm a big believer in the idea that consultants should treat the businesses they work with as if they were their own.
Yeah.
So my goal is to be as involved or as not involved as the client wants me to be. So when we set up something, we very deliberately leave behind documentation so the client can, if they decide to change something in the platform down the road, or they need to fix something, or they just want to understand how it was set up, we leave that documentation behind so they don't need to reach out to us to do those things. They
Okay.
certainly can if they want. We'll welcome those calls of people wanting us to hop in and do something for them. But I
Yeah.
also really believe that like the goal should be to make yourself non-essential and for businesses to kind of be at choice of whether they want to come back to you for something.
Yeah.
I don't think holding clients hostage is typically a good policy, but you do see it of like
Yeah.
someone builds something out for a business and then it's very hard. I'm sure it's the same with website design. It's
Oh,
very
yeah.
hard for the company to understand what has been done, why it was done, and certainly to make changes.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I do the same thing with web design. I always leave an SOP behind on, if you need to update content or manage the CMS with the option of like, or if you don't want to do any of this, then you can
Yeah.
let us do it for you. But you always leave them with a choice and it empowers that business owner to have that control that they really deserve in their business to be able
Yeah.
to run it the way they want. That's great. Fully aligned with that philosophy as well. And I do know, especially in the online space, it can be, there are some stories out there of kind of people getting locked in, or I don't want to use the word trapped. I'm trying to not use anything too negative, but kind of
Yeah.
like stuck in a situation where it's like there's persons controlling this asset being, something like your website or your sales reports or something really important to the business, and you have no way or idea how to access it or be able to make any decisions with it that you would need to. So
Yeah.
let's talk about AI, the buzzword of
Yeah,
the
on everybody's
century.
mind.
Everybody's thinking about AI. Um, is that something that you're like, how's that showing up in your day to day? And just with data analytics, how's AI been a tool that you've seen to be useful or maybe not useful in your world of data?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, I can speak to it kind of in two ways. One is kind of our own day-to-day use case, and for that, we're using a lot of ChatGPT.
Hmm.
I find it to be a tremendously useful tool for people within data analytics, both
Yeah.
because like it will develop code,
Yeah.
it's really strong
I've
code to
used it
use
for
for your
code before.
project.
It definitely can do that.
It's
Amazing.
strong, and like you still want someone looking at that code and
Hmm.
adjusting it and troubleshooting it and making sure that the end result makes sense. So there's still like a need for guardrails. But I have seen it be tremendously valuable in that area. I will say we're cognizant of not putting client information into tools like ChatGPT.
Yeah,
So
totally.
I'm mindful of the fact that we don't want to allow ChatGPT to train on confidential information that clients provide to us. So we're very focused on not using AI in those kind of ways, but in non-identifiable scenarios where we're not having to give it data and we can just kind of prompt it to give us the code we need, we're seeing it, shave hours off of projects, which is a wonderful thing to be able to be more efficient. I'm also seeing BI platforms start to like bring AI into the platform. So Domo is doing a lot of cool stuff and has recently released updates that are kind of bringing AI into the platform that will allow an end user of Domo to log in and to chat even with an AI
Hmm.
bot that will using their own data. So it will bring up, you'll ask like, what were my sales year to date? And it will produce a graph for you. Things that you used to maybe have to
Wow.
go to an analyst for. That stuff is coming, now. I still think there's going to be need for people to make sure the data that's being provided makes sense.
Yeah.
And that the prompts that you're using are actually giving you the data that you want to look at. So, for example, I have one client that they have like 6 different versions of date in their data set. So there's like the date the user signed up, the date the user started actually using the product. So there's a bunch of different dates. And if you just tell the AI like give me the number of signups by month, what date is it using like to determine the month?
Yep.
So you're still going to want someone looking at these things and making sure that stuff makes sense. But I'm just seeing incredible gains in efficiency, and I'm excited about how it's going to free up our time to work on and solve more interesting problems.
I wonder if, and where I kind of see AI being particularly useful for data is identifying trends and risk. Like, for example, I don't know, I'm just going to kind of I'm going to think of something off the top of my head here. So let's just say you've got a business and all your data is getting compiled into the BI, and the AI notify, maybe there's some triggers you set like stress events, like, hey, if revenue falls more than 20% over a 6 month period, I'm just whatever, then I need to be notified about it. But what the AI can do is not only notify you, but it can also analyze your numbers and say, this looks like to be the core driver as to why your your revenue's been falling, because there's other patterns that may be correlated with that drop in revenue. And that, I especially with like, and I come from a finance background as well. I don't know if I ever told you that.
Yeah.
And I know like in finance, risk management practices is really like a big part of it. It's like, where can you remove risk or mitigate risk? and AI being able to kind of identify risk within your data that helps you figure out where you might be taking on too much risk in your numbers. Is that something like, is there anything like that you see as far as, I guess, with the AI? Is it looking at patterns, or is it not developed to that level yet, or maybe is it getting to that point, or is that something that's even considered?
Yeah, I don't know is the answer to that question. I think there's been potential in that area. I think where people have been cautious is letting an AI loose with their data. So,
Right.
and kind of the safety and security concerns that come with it.
Mm,
So, like I don't know if ChatGPT could do that. Like if you gave it access to your data in some form or another, or a similar model like ChatGPT, like
yeah.
could it do those kind of things? I think the concern and where people have kind of gotten stopped with that is not wanting to give it that amount of data about their business. I will say, like, I know Domo is working on ways to like make model management better. So like if
Mm,
you're using the AIs within Domo, like having more control over what is shared and how it's shared, or even bringing in your own kind of models. I know that's been something they've focused on. So I think
mm.
it's certainly something that we'll see more of in a future state. Businesses doing those kind of things, looking at risk management in those ways. I think it hasn't been something that I've seen my clients do yet, primarily due to kind of safety and security concerns around AI, which I think are legitimate.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, data sharing and access to data is always a big concern.
Yeah.
Um, do you, in your business, do you assist customers and clients with the analysis, or is it mostly the compiling and creating the reports? So you do help with analysis as well.
Yeah, we do. And I think we also I think sometimes compiling data and presenting it, I think people forget that there are great opportunities to add analysis and add insights even when you're just tasked with kind of delivering a report.
Yeah.
So I was working with a client a while back, and they're asking me was like, we want to see where visitors are coming from geographically. So visitors to the website,
Mm,
and
mhm.
their client base was only in the US. They only served customers in the US. And when I started to pull the data, I realized like there's a lot of visitors coming from Europe and Africa and countries not in the US. And so, I flagged this and then kind of dug a little deeper and realized that a lot of those visitors from outside of the US were coming from a Google Ads campaign that was being run by an agency, a marketing agency that client had hired. So I dug into their Google Ads settings and I realized that their Google Ads had been incorrectly set up so that if a user had just expressed interest in a location, they would be eligible for an ad. So if I was in Italy, but I had done a lot of searches related to the United States, I could have been targeted by that campaign and served an
Oh,
ad. Yeah. So I alerted my client. They reached out to the agency that they had hired, and um, the agency ended up refunding the client like thousands of dollars that had been erroneously spent targeting people that the client could just never serve because their
right.
target base was exclusively in the United States. So, I think there's times where people can just get into the mindset of like, oh, I'm gonna, quickly generate this report that I've been asked for. But like
Yeah.
really all of those times are really opportunities to say, like, what do I see here? How, what insights can I provide on top of just giving them what they asked for? Like I could have just pulled a report that showed it by US state, but then we would have missed like a really valuable finding that impacted their marketing moving forward. So
Yeah.
lots of opportunities for analysis, and we do work on even we do it even when we're not asked, but we also do it when we're directly asked to produce an analysis about a given area.
That's a great case study, and something that they were probably scratching their head like, gosh, these Google ads aren't really doing anything for our business. And then sometimes they'll blame the Google ads, like, yeah, Google is just a bad place to advertise because, yeah, we tried it and then we never got any results. But it actually comes come to find out, they're targeting people in different countries that would never use their product to begin with. That's
Yeah.
crazy. Oh, any other like little war stories like that you've come across with data that's uncovered anything?
Oh gosh, all kinds. I mean, one common thing we see is companies will be running Google ads but won't have set up conversion actions
Yeah.
for those Google ads. So
Yeah.
basically they're running Google ads and Google ads is running with a goal of, bring more visitors to the website, which may or may not be beneficial to the bottom line of the business. It just
Mm.
depends on like what the user does when they get there. So, you know, the number of campaigns that are running without a goal, without a setup tracking for a conversion action like a purchase,
Hmm.
it's a large number, and it's way better to allow the Google ad algorithm to target not just people who will come to your website, but people who will make a purchase. It just lets campaigns run so much more efficiently and effectively. And yeah, so like that's a common horror story, as we
Yeah.
uh conclude October. But like it's a scary thing to have campaigns running and money being spent without really directing that money at what you want to see for your business.
So what I'm gathering from this is that um, one value proposition, I think that's the word for it for this, for somebody that would want to hire your company to serve them, among many things, right? There's a lot of things but there's one clear thing here I think that people should also be thinking about is if you're spending any amount of money on ads, should probably get you involved to not only make sure that the data is set up correctly for tracking and everything, but also, you could be I could see you being what sounds like from some of these stories, you're also a great person that can provide kind of a check and balance on how the ads are actually set up, because I know you're not the person that runs ads, but you're seeing the tracking the data and how things are set up on the back end, and you're able to catch some of these issues, that could potentially, especially companies that are spending lots and lots of ads. I mean, gosh, I know companies that spend tons of money on ads,
Yeah.
sometimes tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. And, one little mistake like that could be very costly.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's helpful to have some unbiased analyst, whether that's an external company like us or someone within your own organization, really looking at ad performance and what's happening. Those people can be agnostic, and they're not the
Yeah.
people who are running these campaigns, which can be helpful in really assessing how campaigns are performing. I think there's a lot of really great guidance that can come from agencies. I'm a huge believer that marketing agencies can provide really great guidance for your
Sure.
business.
Yeah.
I also think it can be helpful to have people really digging into the numbers who are solely focused on your goals and what you want to see out of your marketing dollars.
Yeah, and it's definitely not it's not a means to like try to catch the agency from messing up. It's more of a
Mm-mm.
like just checks and balances because I mean,
Yeah,
working online, there's a million things that you can miss. And
totally.
you can never have enough eyes to kind of go back behind and check to make sure that things are set up correctly, and having that kind of independent third party review of your data, of your tracking, just to be like, yeah, this looks good. I can see that, conversions are set up the way they're supposed to be, tracking's happening the way it's supposed to be, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to point that out because that had never really occurred to me before when it comes to, I've always thought like, yeah, somebody sets up the tracking and then, you're done. And it's you run your ads or you run,
Yeah.
and it's and if it doesn't work, then you blame Facebook for it and you move on.
Yeah. 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 Well, I mean, and even if someone's done a great job setting up your tracking, if you make changes to your website, like
Yeah.
the tracking can break. So like you want to be
Yeah.
in the habit of routinely checking and not just saying like, oh, we're gonna quit running Facebook ads because it's all
Hmm.
Facebook's fault. Sometimes it's unbeknownst to you, it might be on your end that the conversions you painfully set up 2 years ago are no longer functioning because you've made 6 edits to your website
Hmm.
over the past 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is great. You definitely I mean, we had our conversation at Gather just to kind of get to know each other because there's certainly synergies between what we do. But this
Yeah.
has been really helpful and just giving me more personally more insight. And I know anybody listening, I would hope so as well. Just kind of uncovering more about, really where the value is. Beyond, I think, what the obvious is when it comes to data, because the obvious, like, yeah, data, like I need to know my numbers and I need to inform behavior. But I feel like through this conversation, we've been able to kind of dig a bit deeper into where really some value is there that I think some people don't even think about, like conversion performance and making sure things are
Yeah.
set up correctly, understanding business intelligent platforms and how that can help with, generating automated reports that can help you make decisions. I mean, there's so many things. So this
Yeah.
has been awesome. So I do want to go ahead now. We're kind of getting to the end here. For anybody that does want to work with you, what would be the best step for them to reach out?
Yeah, so they can email me at Lauren at one dash analytics. So ONE dash analytics.com. So that's a great way to get in touch and get started with something. If you're just looking to kind of follow along with what we're doing and get more kind of insights like what I've shared today, signing up for our newsletter on our website, it can be a great resource, or following us on social media can also be a great way to kind of stay tuned and get more learnings. I'm a big believer in this stuff and love to help people any way I can.
Perfect. Well, I will link those up in the show notes. So if anybody wants to connect with you, it's right there. And yeah, this has been great. Thanks so much for being on the podcast. And I look forward to continuing the conversation. And anybody that needs help with getting their data set up and, having these reports and making sure that things are running the way they're supposed to, definitely encourage you to reach out to Lauren and see what she can do to help. So that being said, thanks so much. And Lauren, it's great having you. We'll see everybody on the next one.